Coming up, on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a comprehensive study shows you're probably taking way too long to patch your box. Then we'll go into some major research on possible iOS backdoors, Tor's big bug, and then it's a great big batch of your questions, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 172 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on July 24th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and iX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, why, that's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our excellent host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Alan, it's great to be here this week. It's been, not only do we have quite a big show, but I just made it back last night, so that way we would not interrupt the 172 streak.
Yep. So
we continue on. And your first story that you linked to us in the show notes here is I caught my attention because I didn't know there was a 1.0, but our first...
Well, it was from 2008, I think, or 2004, so it's kind of old.
Yeah, but now we got an updated version of the Laws of Vulnerabilities, version 2.0. What's this about?
Yeah, so Qualies, I guess. I always thought it was Qualsys, but I noticed there's not an extra S there, so it's Qualies, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's supposed to be quality and analyze kind of smushed together in an unfortunate name. But one of the things they're known for is they run the website sslabs.com, where you can go and check your what different ciphers your browser supports and stuff, and also point it at your web server and see what it supports, and help you tweak the order of your ciphers to ensure that you're getting all the perfect forward secrecy ones are the most preferred, hoping that they'll be used and only falling back to the other ones if they're not available and so on.
Right.
And it also has, it simulates, if all of these different clients, ranging from like an old Android phone to like old versions of Java and everything recent, were to connect to your website, what would they pick as their cipher suite? And it's a very powerful thing for analyzing your website and your browser. But what the company actually does is sell an on-demand vulnerability management solution. So basically, the thing you run in your enterprise, and it scans all your servers and finds what's wrong with them and monitors stuff all the time. And they find out vulnerabilities very quickly and tell you, hey, your server over there is affected by one of these vulnerabilities. You should fix it, instead of you having to be on all those mailing lists and managing all that stuff yourself.
Right. You could almost see this as almost like some companies want this just as almost an insurance policy to say we have double coverage of this stuff, even if they are monitoring it.
Exactly. So using the data they've collected from all their customers, they did statistical analysis and came up with what they call the 5 basic laws of vulnerabilities. They cover the vulnerability half-life, which is how long something actually stays vulnerable, the prevalence, which is how often something is vulnerable or how popular a certain vulnerability is, persistence, which is, how often is this one program vulnerable and so on, and then the exploitation trends. And then they also cover they broke it down into 5 different market segments, specifically finance companies, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and services.
Okay.
So the average system remained vulnerable for about 30 days. Okay. So after an announcement, hey, there's this vulnerability, on average, it took 30 days for it to get fixed by the customers. Now, if you were in the customers in the service sector, averaged 21 days instead, so they were ahead of the curve. Whereas customers in the manufacturing sector were behind the curve and took 51 days to patch on average.
Do you suppose that's because one is more likely to have user credentials and more private information, and manufacturing is more about machinery that produces?
It's less about that and probably more about in the service sector, a data breach against you hurts your reputation and takes away your customers.
And trust.
In manufacturing, less so.
People don't really necessarily
even though in manufacturing it could be a worse thing because they break all your machinery that costs millions of dollars to replace.
Or it could lead to massive intellectual property theft too.
Yes, or it could just lead to simple stuff like, every one of the products you made had a defect in it.
Yeah.
If you really want to be insidious, you don't go and like break the machinery. You just insert a small defect in every so that nobody knows until, they've sold 1 million of them and it turns out, they're all defective and then we have to do a recall.
You're a twisted man, Alan. That's evil. Yeah,
but anyway,
totally.
So the average half-life of a vulnerability was 30 days.
Okay.
So obviously people are not patching as quickly as they should be.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just not finding out about the vulnerabilities as quickly as they should be. But part of it, could be policies about testing and stuff, or just, eventually getting around to it. Or there are so many vulnerabilities all the time that you're like, well, we can't reboot every time there's a vulnerability, so we're just going to do it once a month. Or something. Anyway,
that's probably true too.
The most popular vulnerabilities are regularly replaced. So, if there is a vulnerability that gets really popular and it gets patched, very quickly there will be a vulnerability or an exploit for the similar software coming up very soon, right? If you keep patching the hole, they're going to keep finding holes in that application because they chose that application on purpose because it's so prevalent in the first place, right? So attacks against Microsoft Word, every time they fix one, someone's going to work on finding the next one because they always want to have a vulnerability for Word.
For sure.
And that means that some systems are basically continuously vulnerable because even once you patch it, there's the next one you haven't heard about yet.
Yeah.
The lifespan of most, if not all, vulnerabilities is unlimited. And a large percentage of vulnerabilities are never fully fixed. There's still machines out there that are vulnerable to the Conficker thing from 2009. Or 2008 even, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, yes.
And so,
wow.
they never seem to go away because not every person is ever going to patch. Or even if every person did patch, someone would boot up an old VM or do a fresh install off, an old Windows 2008 ISO with no patches on it or whatever.
Geez, Alan, when the zombie apocalypse comes, the only software that will survive are these self-replicating malware that's infecting unpatched boxes. They just continue to spread on its own.
80% of vulnerability exploits are now available within single-digit number of days after the vulnerability's public release.
No surprise there, huh?
So when we announce there's a vulnerability, it usually means that there will be an exploit for it in less than 9 days. In 2008, Qualsys logged 56 vulnerabilities that had 0-day exploits, including the RPC vulnerability that produced Conficker in the first place. So some of those vulnerabilities, you don't even get 9 days, you get 0. In 2009, the first vulnerability released by Microsoft, MS-09001, had an exploit available within 7 days. Later, Microsoft's April Patch Tuesday included known exploits for 47% of all the vulnerabilities that they published in that update. So by the time Microsoft released the patch, 50% of all the patches of all the things they fixed were already being exploited in the wild.
Right.
Wow. This law had the most drastic change from the original 1.0 version of the laws, which said that most people had about 60 days between when a vulnerability was announced and when it would start being exploited. By the time somebody developed an exploit for it and started using it. So, back in the 1.0 version of the laws, you had a 60-day window to patch. And we see that most people are patching within 30 days, so that seems pretty reasonable. But now you have less than 9 days. And so even 21 days is probably not good enough.
What large enterprise could realistically ever move at that speed with a large infrastructure? I mean, it's going to require a huge re-architecting of the way people have things deployed.
Yeah, and it basically requires trying to get rid of a lot of the fragility in a lot of these systems.
Yeah. We, on Linux Action Show, about a month ago, interviewed the developer of CoreOS, and he's attempting to make updates totally they're using containers and VMs and all these things, and his whole idea is, a rapid updates that are safe. It's interesting. I talked to Rackspace recently, yesterday, and they're all in on it too because they were talking about the same thing about how they want to make people patch faster. So this is something people are talking about, but hard solution.
That was one of the things Rackspace does is that they manage a lot of that for you.
Yeah.
You're paying quite a premium over the regular price to rent a server, but you're getting really insane support and
fanatical.
You can ask them to install software for you and stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of the problem is that even just updating minor versions of a software can cause things to break.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we see people, well, we can't do this upgrade because it might break stuff, and our system's very fragile and we don't want to poke it.
Or they go along and they do updates and then finally something big happens and they have a big disaster and then they become really gun shy. And then it creates a culture of paranoia around updates.
Well, yeah, I had a similar issue just last week.
Oh, yeah?
Decided I was working on our Puppet config, and one of the things wasn't working. And it was like, I need this new feature of the future parser in the newer versions of Puppet.
Yeah.
So I updated Puppet. Well, it turns out they've decided to deprecate the entire way everything works and introduce a new way. It's like, so instead of having, this one manifest file in which you can import other files, so like include other files, and because I had one directory with all the servers in it, and one directory with all the classes in it, and one directory with all the packages in it, and one directory with all the users in it.
Sounds quite organized.
Yes, it was. Well, now that's not an option anymore. You can't have include statements. Everything has to either be one giant file or a directory where every file in the directory is included in alphabetical order.
Why would they do that?
You can't do subdirectories.
That seems like a pretty big removal.
I don't know, because Puppet likes to just randomly remove functionality and make you redo everything every couple of months. It's really annoying.
Yeah.
They had some vague reason. They're like, well, we don't like these. We're not technically correct. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, so now I have this one directory with all my files prefixed. The types, the classes are prefixed with the number 200 underscore class underscore the name.
Right.
And I can't find my hosts by the alphabet anymore because I have to make sure the files are included in the right order for stuff to work.
Back to Rackspace, you know what else they're doing is they are moving away from Chef and Puppet, and they're integrating with, boy, I'm blanking on the name. It's a commercial configuration management solution. It's really popular. I'm sure the chat room will tell me. I think it might be made by Atlassian. I'm not sure, but it's...
Or Altasan or whatever it's called?
I don't know. No, I don't think it's... Maybe it was Jira.
No, Jira's a bug management.
Right, yeah.
So,
but I think
it's from the company that does that, right?
Yes, exactly. Anyways, because
the
they've
one
had
I've heard
complaints.
a lot about lately is Ansible, but it seems less featureful than Puppet.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was basically a pain for about 4 hours while I had to rewrite my entire Puppet thing.
Ooh, oh man, that's a
part of it was if you're using Puppet 3.6, the new version, the import feature is not actually deprecated. But if you're using the future parser, which is like gives you the extra features, in particular being able to do a for each over an array of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm using that in my config for auto-generating a very complicated config file. Basically, our DNS zone is auto-generated by getting a list of all of our servers and knowing what regions they're in and constructing the geo map. So it uses nested for each statements. And so to get that feature, I had to upgrade. And basically, that gives you the parser that will eventually be Puppet 4, which has the feature deprecated. So I got early deprecation.
Oh.
But yes, it was not fun.
It is so I think the underscore of this report is it's time to tighten up that patch window. It needs to be tighter than it's ever been before. If it can be under 9 or 10 days, that's your safest window, you think? Is that enough time to test, though?
Well,
you really got to be motivated and mobilized.
Now, this is, by the time Microsoft comes out with a patch, people might be already half the time the exploit's already being used against people.
Yeah.
And so you have to rely on what the testing Microsoft did.
Well, and then,
and in general, Microsoft's got a lot better about that, and we haven't seen very many updates that catastrophically broke anything lately.
But it can be more hit and miss with some of the open source projects. A lot of times people are just, in general, being fairly responsible about it more often than not, but that's because they're choosing to.
And sometimes it would be very nice if open source projects separated security fixes from feature changes. Because that's the problem that even OpenSSL has had. It's you have to update to get the security fix. And, by the way, this includes this new feature.
Right.
That you might end up actually adding more vulnerabilities because it leaked in there or whatever. But you can understand the point of a lot of the software projects of we don't want to have to be maintaining a bunch of different branches concurrently. 1.0 and 1.1 and 1.0 will just get security fixes. Yeah.
That's tough.
But to deal with that, the FreeBSD project has a stable branch of its package system now that only gets security updates, except for sometimes that means the only way to get the security update is to do an upgrade.
Yeah. Very true. Something like boring SSL is what we need, Alan. Something like boring SSL, which we have a roundabout story, a little bit about boring SSL in a little bit. Hey, why don't we take a break and talk about IX Systems? Go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP, the first sponsor of the TechSNAP program today. IX Systems builds really systems that can be something for your home all the way up to massive enterprise-grade rigs, all powered by these incredible Intel Xeon processors. Or in the case of the FreeNAS Mini, the Atom enterprise-grade processor. I got a chance at OSCON to finally get my hands on the FreeNAS Mini. They even let me open it up.
FreeNAS Mini?
Yeah, they even let me open the case, and you would not believe. you would not believe the amount of SATA connectors this thing has. Even with all 4 drive bays full, there is way more SATA to be had. It is incredible.
Yeah.
Nice rig.
I saw one of the boards they have has like, there's a 4-port Intel controller, and then a 2-port 6G controller for your SSDs, and then there's another 4 or 6-port controller. And then there's an optional expansion card that adds another 8 ports or something.
I think, now don't quote me on this, but I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of, even with all 4 drives in the hot swap bay used, there's still, in the FreeNAS Mini, another 7 SATA ports available. Now, I don't know if some of them are unavailable when the hot swaps are in use or not, but in terms of ports, there was like still 7 SATA ports open on this thing. This thing is a beast, Alan, and that's how IX builds everything. And of course, they were at OSCON while I was down there, and that once again they talked me into wearing the horns, and I got caught. Yeah. Well, they twisted my arm, Alan. They twisted my arm. I tell you, I was coerced. The other thing they coerced me to do, of course, was I walked away with some sweet swag. I got issue 1, the only printed edition of the FreeBSD journal from February, January.
Did you maybe turn that to page 30 something?
Oh, no. I noticed there's a really nice IX ad on the back. A really great, there's one of their high-end rigs right there.
One of the nice, do you see the quote that's on the back of the magazine there?
Oh, let me see here. Oh, wow, look at that. I didn't notice that.
I didn't even notice that at first, and then one day
IX system takes the headache out of server shopping. Alan Jude. That's awesome.
But also, open it up and flip to page 34.
Okay, 34. All right, here we go. Let's see.
I have a copy too.
Yeah, I noticed this. All right, 34. The Z file system, ZFS. Who's this? Did you write this, Alan?
Yes.
You wrote this article?
Yes.
Whoa, dude, look at this. This is nice.
Oh,
whoa.
It actually goes, my name's at the end, which is on page 38.
Yeah, you wrote a lot. Wow. Nice.
I actually wrote one in, this is the January-February issue. It's a digital magazine you can buy at freebsdjournal.com.
Right.
In the May-June edition, there's an article about IPFW, the other firewall in FreeBSD that doesn't always get as much hay.
Right.
And I talk about some of the cool things you can do with it, like traffic shaping and simulating wireless networks or simulating lossy networks or latent networks, especially for testing. Like we use it to test our video streaming stuff.
That's cool. This is a great printout.
How does this video stream work over, when there's 1% packet loss because of your Wi-Fi or stuff like that?
If you're a FreeBSD fan, you should check out the FreeBSD Journal. And if you're a TechSNAP fan and you like reliable systems built with white glove support, go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. That lets them know you heard about it right here on the TechSNAP program. They got everything from home office servers all the way up to the biggest servers you're going to.
And they custom build everything. So, I got, it's like I need a little one-use server to be my router, and I need it to be as small as possible and preferably not too loud. And they built it, and it was even cheaper than one of those FreeNAS minis. And then, of course, it has no hard drive slots. It just has a little 4 gig microscopic USB stick for the operating system, but that's all I needed for a router. And then from I've went up through the range. I bought a little single CPU i3 server that we co-located in Portland, and that runs some stuff. It's actually where the archive for all the JB shows when you download them comes from.
From the back archive, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's the authoritative source that all the other servers in the CDN pull it from. And then we went up from higher than that. I have a system that I got here recently in my basement. It's got 12 hard drives, and it's got 2 big Xeon E5s, and that's does a bunch of stuff for Scale Engine, and will also be the base for our virtualization stuff when we get to that.
Ooh.
And then we went up, and then we bought, the giant 4U thing we showed you the pictures of that has 36 4 terabyte hard drives in it. So we've basically gone the range with IX from like the $800 system to the $20,000 system. And they've all been great.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. They've also got the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. 11 key traits you must absolutely demand from your provider. And hello to all our friends over at IX Systems. It was great seeing you guys at OSCON.
Matt, another Matt, and Josh.
They know how to do the convention thing, too, because they are straight up pros. Like, they've got the swag, they've got the cool cloth banners, they got the displays going.
They have a couple of those because sometimes they're at more than one conference at once.
I mean, they're conference pros. So if you're ever there, you should stop by and say hi to them.
Yeah. if you go to the ones mostly on the East Coast, you'll probably meet Drew. She goes to something like 20 plus conferences a year. That's insane. That's one every 2 weeks.
That is,
it's amazing she gets any work done.
Hey, I missed it the first time, but that cool art they have for the beginning of your article, in the artwork there, it does say by Alan Jude on it.
Okay, but it's also, I have like my byline or whatever at the
I see there's a nice Jupiter Broadcasting plug in there. This is a really, really, really nice write-up, Alan. Like that's really good.
Well, I did the IPFW one was very good as well.
Oh, look at you, son. Look at you. Good work. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about how small businesses can maybe better protect themselves from credit card theft. And, we talk a lot about big scale like Target. And then, of course, they have the financial resources to hire entire firms to protect them. But, like I think of like Angela's mom. They have a diner in Seattle. It's just the husband and the wife that run it. And they take credit cards all the time, every day, multiple times a day. So does this stuff apply to them?
They really couldn't have, they
couldn't afford to hire,
because they couldn't, if something did get breached, they couldn't spend $15,000 or more to hire someone to come in and investigate and figure out what happened.
They would be in a really bad spot if something like that happened. So where do we go?
So this is an article over at darkreading.com, which is a kind of a magazine type thing about this type of stuff.
It's an information week.
And this particular article is by Chris Nutt, who's the director of incident response and malware at Mandiant, which, if you remember, that's the company that did the investigation for the New York Times when they were being advanced persistent threaded upon by the Chinese.
That building that they were operating out of.
Yes, by the Chinese.
Although I believe Mandiant's actually been bought now, too, by a larger company.
I think so. Was it FireEye?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think it was FireEye. Yeah.
FireEye is actually the next article. We get to them in a minute.
Okay. All right.
But so he kind of talks about, walks into a little mom and pop shop and he goes to pay for something and they swipe his credit card and he realizes that it's a terminal, like a card reader connected to a regular desktop PC. And, all the cables are just laying there. It's like, oh, somebody could so easily get this. This would be horrible. So the things to consider when you're processing credit cards with a computer is A, does the company browse the internet or read emails on the computer that you use for that credit card processing? Right? If you remember back, we talked about that story, I think it was in Washington State actually, about the machine that controls the doors in the prison, the cell doors in the prison.
Yes.
And it had been purposely not connected to the internet because it was an important control system, but the guards hooked it up to the internet because they wanted to browse Facebook on it or something. And it ended up getting infected and somebody started opening and closing the prison cell doors.
I had a client that it's a very good, very popular burger chain. I think they were local to Washington. And their payment system ran on XP. I've talked about them a little bit. They ran on XP embedded cash registers. And then the back end ran on XP Pro with just like a local SQL database. And, of course, same exact scenario. It was in the staff's weight room because that was the only place they had in a kitchen. And when they want to go on Facebook, they hooked it up to the internet, and they got malware on there, and their payment processing got shut down. No information was stolen or anything like that, but it took their payment system down, which was a disaster for their business for the day.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a big problem.
Yeah, so, if you're dealing with credit cards and the system needs to do nothing else so that kind of thing has happened. So is unencrypted card data transmitted through any exposed cables? Sometimes just the cable between the card reader and the computer is like a serial cable, and someone could easily disconnect. If that's exposed out on the other side, if it's just sitting on the edge of the counter where you go up to pay for stuff, the serial port, someone could add a little sniffer to the serial port.
Oh, yeah.
And intercept the data on the way to the computer because it's not encrypted there.
You could probably even tuck it in behind the device. People never even notice.
Yeah, actually, this happened at... Which store was it? We talked about this like 2 or 3 months ago. Someone had stuck a keylogger between the point of sales thing and the cash register because it connected over like a PS2 connector.
Right. Was that the craft store breach?
No, I don't think it was the craft store. It was like a grocery store or something. And one guy would walk up and like distract the teller.
Yeah.
While the other person...
It was a grocery store, wasn't it?
Yeah, would connect the keylogging device. And so you have to worry about that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure the cables aren't exposed so that it's not easy for people to do things like that. And also, make sure that you're not just sending stuff over your internal LAN, right? Everything should be SSL or when you're doing credit cards or debit cards, because actually getting a debit card stolen is worse because you don't have the zero liability you do with the credit card.
Right.
Is the card processing software configured correctly, and is it up to date? Right. You want to make sure it's using SSL, make sure that it's not Heartbleed version of SSL, and all these other things. Has the computer's operating system been updated, and is it hardened and locked down? Is it set so that you can't use the internet easily on it? Is the computer running antivirus, and is that up to date? And that actually brings up the quick question of, if you don't want to connect the payment system to the internet, how do you get your virus scanner updates all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much no way now. Back in the day, you'd probably import a file, but some don't even support that anymore.
Exactly. And does the company outsource IT management to somewhere else,
right,
where there's some kind of remote management port open to the internet, where someone could actually break in by brute forcing the password for that or something, or by compromising a computer at the remote management company?
Target.
Yeah. Or, lots of small stores like that would outsource to, say, someone like you, who would set up, remote desktop or team viewer or something like that in order to manage their systems.
Yep.
And, that.
A lot of times I would come in and maybe every server has RDP forwarded, maybe just on different ports for that LAN, and maybe we're talking 20, 30 servers. I've seen that before. Yep. VNC on every desktop is very, very, very common. And then, of course, you have things like LogMeIn set up and all that kind of stuff, too.
Right. Plus, you're getting into stuff now that Intel has that vPro stuff built in, where you can actually take over the machine that way as well.
Yeah.
They said the upside is that small businesses often have an advantage in the area of the software updates, especially for the payment processing stuff, because if all you have is the credit card processing software running on a computer sitting there, then you can update that fairly easily. Whereas bigger places will have like a back office system, and you got multiple servers and multiple clients, and you have to update them all at once, and it involves some kind of downtime or something, as opposed to just installing a patch that you can do after you close one night or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so small business should be kind of leading the way by making sure that they have all these updates. But oftentimes, because they don't have a dedicated IT department or IT person or whatever, the updates just never happen.
Isn't that a catch-22? Because they have the agility and flexibility to patch and move quickly, but they don't have the financial resources to implement it.
Yeah, or just don't have the people.
The knowledge. Yeah, they might not even know it's a problem, depending on the business.
Yeah. So they have some recommendations, most of which I agree with, but one I do not. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So some of the recommendations are: use a dedicated LAN, or at least a VLAN, or use a cellular connection instead of running your payment processing on the same LAN, or worse, the Wi-Fi that's used for your regular business, or even worse, by your customers.
Yeah.
How often do you go into a restaurant and your phone picks up? There's two Wi-Fis, restaurant and restaurant_POS or whatever.
Yeah, and it's maybe one's got a password and maybe one doesn't, and maybe neither of them do.
But sometimes you see there's only the one Wi-Fi.
Yes.
And it's like, so those payment terminals they rock around to your table with to take your credit card, so they don't have to leave the table with your credit card, which is definitely a good thing to avoid skimming. But if that's doing it over Wi-Fi, it's like, I wonder if that's actually talking SSL, or if it's just talking to a base station, which then talks SSL to the credit card company.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can keep that separated, there's less chance someone's going to sniff it, or just, less chance that someone's going to compromise another machine that has access to that network and then be able to attack the point of sale system itself. Then they also mentioned, do not maintain a payment card industry environment, or maintain the smallest one possible. So if you don't have to store customers' credit card data, don't, because then you don't have as much to worry about.
Exactly. That's key.
Instead, use a PCI-compliant reader and like a service, something like Stripe or Square. With those ones, you encrypt the data and send it to them, and you never store it or keep it at all, and you try basically get your hands off of it as soon as you can. And that way you never have to store the credit card details. Even if you have to be able to refund a card, or like bill somebody monthly, services like Stripe will give you a unique token when you charge the card, and you just use that in the future. And that can't be used. That doesn't actually give you the credit card number. It just gives you, hey, this connects it to the transaction at Stripe, and they have the credit card number.
Right. And
that way I never have to have it. And that lets you do rebilling, refunds, adjustments, whatever you need to do without actually storing the credit card number. They say, do not outsource the maintenance of your point-of-sale device to a company that will directly access remote management ports over the internet. If you're going to outsource your maintenance of the POS devices, you probably want it to involve some guy actually coming on site and doing it, because exposing it to remote management over the internet means that you're also exposing it to attacks over the internet.
Yes.
Right? There should be no path from the internet to your point of sale system.
Underscore that.
Yeah. Also, protect the physical security of all of the systems that store, process, or transmit cardholder information. All your security is lost if an attacker can alter or replace your equipment. Right? If they can stick a keystroke logger in the middle of, on one of those cables and plug it back in, you're never going to notice this thing. It's like this big. They're microscopic. You're not going to notice it. And
they can look like a PS2 adapter.
Yeah, or they can be so small they just look like they're part of the existing connector or whatever.
Yes.
And then, they come back later, pick it up, remove it, plug your thing back in, and nobody knows anything happened except they just walked away with all the stuff that's gone through that keyboard since then. Do not allow systems in your PCI environment to connect to the internet aside from any connections required to process the credit card transactions or patch the system. Right? So you could configure the firewall so it can only connect out to your payment processor and Windows Update and nothing else. Right? Also, do not allow systems in your PCI environment, anything that has anything to do with credit cards, to connect to any system on your network that is not necessary for processing credit card transactions or patching. Right? You have some, the machine your accountant uses or whatever, or, the machine employees use to surf the internet, any of that. Then ideally should be on a completely separate VLAN or something, so that there's no way when those systems get infected for the attacker to then island hop into your payment point of sale system. Right? This is what Target should have known.
Yes. Is
that their point of sale system shouldn't be able to be connected to from any of the machines or servers in their office, let alone from the management system for their refrigeration. Because they managed to island hop through all this stuff and have access to all the servers and get Target's email and stuff, where all that stuff should have been isolated. And then one piece of advice I didn't agree with was they said, don't use a computer, use a mobile device or a tablet, because those are more secure operating systems.
Boy, that's questionable.
Exactly. They specifically mentioned iOS, which maybe has slightly a better update record than Android, but not really.
I guess maybe iOS over a Windows box.
Well, yeah, but a properly admin Windows box will get updates more often, and you'll have more visibility on what's going on.
Well, and there's also the vendor support side that would be more readily available on the Windows side. Right, and mostly with Windows, Microsoft actually releases announcements telling you what the vulnerability was. Yeah, what the problem was.
Apple's just we fixed some stuff.
Security improvements.
Have this update.
Security improvements. Yeah.
Now, the thing they did recommend, what they were talking about there mostly was if you're using something like the Stripe or Square readers, the data is, I think, encrypted on that, and the phone doesn't even have access to it. In that case, that's better, but it's not really saying that a mobile device or a tablet's operating system is more secure than a desktop.
I've also had it pitched that there was a client wanted to be able to go out at conventions and be able to sell some of their inverters to,
and that's what the Square and Stripe card readers for your cell phone are specifically for.
And in that case, what the vendor told them was, well, look, get this iPad with the built-in LTE modem, and don't use the conference Wi-Fi. Use the LTE because Square does encryption, and then you're on your own isolated network too, so it's more secure in that way. So it does have, the mobile has that advantage if you're maybe at a conference where there's a community Wi-Fi.
Right. Always use the cellular when you can.
If it works, yeah.
Yes. And that was, I mentioned that earlier, but yeah. And then I also say where possible, offload the processing to the provider. It might be slightly more expensive. Some of those places, Stripe is 2.9%, whereas if you go with your traditional bank one where you have to do more of the work and you have to buy the hardware and stuff, it might be 2.1%. But it's moving all the risk of all the processing and stuff off to them instead of you.
Yeah.
And that's probably worth more to your business than that fraction of a percent of on the processing fees.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Good advice, Alan. Anything else on that story?
Not on that one, nope.
Well, I wanted to catch something before we moved on. This article has a cartoon here on the side of the page, and it's pretty good. For you audio listeners, it's a chicken pointing at an egg, and I think you're supposed to infer the egg's pointing at the chicken, and they're both saying at the same time, it's their responsibility first, and the caption down below is, Cloud Security Explained. Chicken or the egg problem. And I think this is so true. Dropbox just recently had an article. It's like, well, if people really want security, they should probably encrypt their own data. Oh, okay. Well, let me talk about.
Well, yes, that was Dropbox's response to Edward Snowden saying
Yes.
Dropbox is an enemy of privacy.
Yeah.
Like, if our users care, they can encrypt their data. Just know that once you do, all of our search functionality and all the useful features go away.
Right.
And that's exactly the problem. There's really no nice solution to that.
Yeah.
If you encrypt it, then Dropbox can't read it, which is good. But it also means Dropbox can't read it, which is bad.
Yep. Yeah, you lose some of the
You lose
sync
deduplication so that
yep.
you don't. You always have to upload everything.
And like the in-web browser
you're
viewer,
auto-searching.
you lose
Yeah,
that.
The browser viewer and all the searching and indexing and stuff goes away. But, which is better.
My solution, my friend, DigitalOcean.com. I set up my own droplet where I have root access, and I put BitTorrent sync on that bad boy, and now I'm in control of my data, and I'm the only one that can see it. DigitalOcean is simple cloud hosting dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up a cloud server. And if you use our promo code, get ready for this, because, boy, you've only got a couple of days left, so jump on it, everybody. SNAP July. SNAP July when you check out. One word, you'll get a $10 credit, and you can create a cloud server in less than 55 seconds, and pricing plans start at only $5 per month. That gets you 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, and one blazing fast CPU connected to tier 1 bandwidth, so you get a terabyte of transfer for $5 a month. I just can't even, that's just amazing. DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, and a brand new one in London. Their interface is simple. The control panel is crazy intuitive, and power users can replicate it on a much larger scale with a straightforward API that they have. In fact, I just saw in our Linux Action Show subreddit a way to manage your DigitalOcean droplets from the command line using the DigitalOcean API. So that's pretty cool. And the thing I think that's kind of remarkable about DigitalOcean is we here even at Jupiter Broadcasting, it's funny because we don't have a huge budget for servers and for implementing infrastructure, but we also have a need to accomplish projects and get things online and make them available to hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people at once. And so when we were kicking around, should we self-host here? Should we do? It's like, no. DigitalOcean Droplet, it's so easy. It's $5 a month. You spin up a cloud server in under a minute. We set up an Arch box really quick. We got it all updated with everything we need for this test script. And when we're done, we can shut it down. And when you use the promo code SNAPJuly, you'll get that $10 credit, and you can try it out for 2 months for absolutely free when you get the $5 Droplet. Go check out their amazing dashboard, the DNS management, the ability to do snapshots, all of this stuff that you would think is complicated and hard. It's amazingly easy. And if you're an expert, you don't feel like it's watered down. They've really struck that balance between advanced options, easy to use. They've got an HTML5 console where you can watch your droplet boot right up from the beginning. You can see the BIOS all the way into when the operating system's up and running. You can restart, snapshot, backup, redeploy, all of that kind of stuff. DigitalOcean.com. Use the promo code SNAPJuly. That'll get you that $10 credit when you check out over at DigitalOcean. And then you can try it out for a little while. They've also got hourly pricing if you need to turn something on or off for a little bit.
Yes, that's very powerful.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's great for just some quick scaling, some great quick infrastructure, do some testing, shut it back down. They've got a good community, all kinds of stuff, all sitting on top of SSD drives, so you know your I/O is going to be blazing fast, which means your density is going to be higher than ever. DigitalOcean.com, Snap July when you check out. And a really big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, on this next story, not too surprising, but we actually have some hard numbers on how companies tend to respond to...
Well, this isn't companies. This is the government itself.
Oh, good. Okay, interesting. So how the government's responding to like intrusions or cyber threats, quote unquote?
So this is the Government Accountability Office, which is in charge of auditing all the other agencies of the government, issued a report showing the shortcomings in the incident response procedures of various government agencies.
This is our
So I think they start out with like 30 government agencies that are under their purview, and they randomly picked 6 to dig deep into and look at every incident they had and what the result was.
Interesting. And they worked with FireEye to do the work?
No. FireEye then had comments about the report afterwards.
I see. So they combed through the report afterwards.
Yeah, they read the whole report, which I didn't have time to read the entire thing, just a big chunk of it. And then they had some comments about, basically they had some strong words. The GAO pointed out some problems, but they were kind of wishy-washy on it.
Yeah,
they were like, oh, they should do better. FireEye's like, no, if you don't do this right, you might as well not do anything.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so the GAO report says agencies need to improve their cyber incident response practices. And they said, based on a statistical sample of cyber incidents reported in fiscal year 2012, which starts sometime in 2012 and goes into the beginning of 2013, GAO projects that agencies did not completely document actions taken in response to detected incidents in about 65% of cases.
Whoa.
So in 65% of the times where there was an attack against the government, they didn't properly actually keep track of all the things they did in response to that.
Do we know what qualified as
whether
attack?
They did anything.
Is it more than just malware on the machine?
It could range from malware to actually machines being purposely compromised or stuff.
Okay.
But in 65% of the cases, they didn't keep track of what they did or whether they did anything.
Okay. Great.
For example, agencies identified the scope of an incident in the majority of cases, but frequently did not demonstrate that they had determined the impact of an incident. So it's like, oh, this machine got some malware or whatever, but they didn't actually figure out what happened. Or, this machine got hacked, but what did they steal? What did that affect? What could have happened? All those things. They didn't actually bother investigating it. They just, reformat the machine or remove the malware or whatever.
Right.
In addition, agencies did not consistently demonstrate how they had handled other key activities, such as whether preventative actions to prevent a reoccurrence of an incident were taken. Right? So they didn't actually talk about whether they did anything to make sure that machine wouldn't just get compromised again.
That is amazing.
Agencies have recorded actions to halt the spread of or otherwise limit the damage caused by an incident in about 75% of cases, government-wide. However, agencies did not demonstrate any such actions in the remaining 25% of incidents government-wide. So sometimes they talked about what they did to make sure that machine that got infected didn't infect other machines.
Mm-hmm.
But a quarter of the time, they're like, we didn't think about it.
Meh. We're busy.
Yeah. In about 77% of incidents government-wide, the agencies identified and eliminated the remaining elements of an incident. However, agencies did not demonstrate that they had effectively eradicated all traces of an intrusion in 23% of the cases. So sometimes when they get hacked, they make sure that, everything gets nuked and started fresh. Sometimes they're like, well, we didn't really look to see if they compromised anything else as well.
I mean, we ran malware bytes.
Island hopping.
Malware bytes came clean.
So we ran malware bytes on this machine, but we didn't check to see if they island hopped and got to anywhere else.
You think we got a problem?
Agencies returned their systems to an operational ready state about 81% of the incidents. However, they did not consistently document remediation actions on whether they had taken steps to prevent an incident from reoccurring. Specifically, agencies did not demonstrate that they had acted to prevent an incident from recurring in 49% of incidents government-wide.
That's unbelievable.
So 81% of the time, they managed to actually get the system up and going again. And half the time, they didn't keep track of whether they had done anything to make sure it didn't just get reinfected.
That seems fundamental, Alan.
Yes. In another incident, an agency received a report from U.S. CERT indicating that the login credentials of two of an agency's components had been compromised. When contacting the impacted components, the agency incident handlers mistyped the potentially compromised credentials for one of the components and did not respond to an email request from the component requesting clarification and failed to follow up with a second component when it did not respond to the initial alert. Despite these errors, the incident handlers closed the incident without taking further action.
Oh, sure.
So two sub-departments had their login credentials stolen, and so CERT tells the agency's incident response team, which sent emails to the two sub-departments, and in one of those, they typoed the thing that got hacked, and so they're like, we don't have such a thing. How could it have gotten hacked? Did you mean this other thing? And they didn't get an answer. And then the second bite, they never got a response when they told the second component, and so they don't know if it was ever fixed. But they're like, oh, my job's done. Close. Next ticket. Probably because they have some kind of SLA that says they have to close the ticket within so many days.
I was going to say, I've worked in shops where it's like, if you don't, the boss looks at how many tickets you closed every day, and that's how you're measured, is the tickets closed.
And, at the end of each week, if there's any tickets that have been open a long time and you get yelled at, it's like, yeah, well, it's not my fault that people at this other department won't respond.
Now that I think about it, I mean, I think I have definitely fallen in the trap a few times of, like, I haven't heard back from a user, and I assume it's closed, and the client's looking at the length of the tickets, and sometimes I've closed it before it should have been closed. And you can always reopen it.
In this case, it was a compromise.
Yeah.
And something had been compromised.
Right.
And like, we didn't hear anything.
I mean, that's not the same. That's not an equivalent thing at all.
Exactly.
That's ridiculous.
That's not equivalent to, we were having trouble with our printer.
My printer,
and we didn't hear back. I assume you fixed the printer.
Right.
Or
that's
found some other way to print and leave me alone.
Not quite the same thing.
Exactly. In a malware incident, sensors on an agency's network recorded an agency computer contacting an external domain known to host malicious files and downloading a suspicious file. Incident handlers closed the ticket without recording any actions taken to contain or otherwise remediate the potential malware infection. So their firewall recorded this machine connecting out to a known bad host and downloading stuff. That machine most likely has malware. They didn't, according to the records, they didn't do anything. They didn't, disinfect that machine. They didn't make sure it wasn't infecting other machines.
Well, and the other thing,
and so on.
The other thing they outline in this report is there are procedures they should be following. It's not like
there are two. I forget what the first one is, and the second one is the NIST, which is the National Standards
National
Body.
Institute Standard. Yeah, and I've been showing like when you talk about, I've been showing what they recommend you're supposed to be doing.
Yes. So they have this vaguely named Special Publication 800-61.
Yeah.
But it's actually the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. And it specifically walks you through what you should do after a computer security incident to make sure you handle it properly. And so that's what the GAO was measuring, the responses they saw from these different government agencies. Did I mention that one of the government agencies that was being audited was the Department of Homeland Security?
No.
Anyway,
man.
So now FireEye, I think it was actually Richard Belchark, who's that interesting researcher I follow, had his comments on it. And they make an enterprise security real-time threat protection platform.
Of course.
It uses hashes and stuff and allows you to say, only this valid software is allowed to run and this known bad software isn't allowed to run and stuff. But it's more the whitelist approach. So you decide which software runs on your network and nothing else is allowed, as opposed to just trying to ban viruses, because the problem with that is there's new viruses and you haven't, when it's a 0 day, you haven't seen it before.
Right.
So they had particular comments about a couple of things in the middle of that thing we were talking about. When they talked about, 75% of the time they talked about what they'd done to contain the bad guy that had breached the network. They say anything less than 100% containment is essentially 0% containment, right? If a government agency fails to completely contain an intrusion, any gaps leave the adversary freedom to maneuver. He can exploit the containment failure to proliferate to other systems and remain in control of the organization's systems, right? If you only cut off 3 sides, then they can use the other side to go out, and then they get around you, and they can, get back to the machine you just cleaned up.
Meanwhile, you think you got them.
And reinfect it, yeah. If you don't get them 100%, then they're just going to come back.
Jeez.
If an adversary retains access to even one system, he can rebuild his position and retake control of the victim. Also, if a victim fails to make the environment tougher for the adversary, the intruder will likely return using the same techniques that are utilized to gain access the first time, right? Victims need to learn from intrusions and implement remediation. If they got in by spear phishing, you have to train your staff not to fall for phishing emails, right? If they got in by an unpatched Windows thing, you have to make sure you patch your Windows things, right? And on and on. So if you're not learning from the experience, then you're just running around cleaning up and letting them make more and more mess. And then lastly, I had, it's not clear from the report, but they talk about 81% of the machines being returned to production ready or whatever. If a machine's compromised, it probably needs to be reformatted.
Yeah.
Because, if they put a rootkit on there, you can never trust that you actually got every bit of the virus or the compromise, right? Especially with the prevalence of rootkits. And now that we've seen persistent malware that infects the BIOS and can reinfect the operating system after a fresh install, right? You want to not just clean up malware. Maybe if it's just light malware, you can, if it's common stuff, maybe you can just clean it up. But if an attacker has compromised a server, you probably need to nuke it from orbit.
Or if it's a critical Department of Homeland Security workstation.
Yes. Especially with persistent malware, you're going to want to reflash the BIOS and then reinstall the OS.
Yeah.
And hope that nothing survived.
Yeah.
And it's entirely possible that something might. If it's state actors against you, you might need to take the stance that that machine needs to be retired.
Right. And that is very realistically a possibility for these particular types of systems. That's not
if it's
so
the VHS,
theoretical.
maybe they need to scrub the system as clean as they can and then sell it, to a regular person.
To some sucker.
Some sucker. It's too bad you have, super resilient Chinese malware in the BIOS that can't be removed.
But you get a great price on this Dell.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds legit.
I'm not advocating that the machine should be ground up. We talked about some insane things people have talked about before, but they definitely want to, when that stuff happens, that's what you got to do.
If you would like to check out the NIST recommendation for response to cyber incidents, you can find a link to that PDF as well as references to everything Alan just covered in the show notes.
The whole GAO report is 55 pages. I didn't have time to read it all this morning.
If you want some light reading while you're on the train, ladies and gentlemen, I know how that can be. I've just recently done so. And there you go. All right.
Although, if you want light reading on the train, I'd recommend one of Bruce Schneier's books about practical approaches to security there.
Or a great article about ZFS in the FreeBSD Journal. Could also recommend that for you.
That's only like 3 pages, 4 pages.
Yeah.
That's not 55 pages.
Well, yeah, that's fine. I might just nod off in between. All right, let's talk about Ting for a second. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go over to TechSNAP.ting.com and rock the support for your favorite systems network and administration podcast. I was rocking Ting while at OSCON. Portland, Oregon is a Ting LTE city, and that was great. I was taking pictures while we were there at the OSCON, which, by the way, amazing that my phone was able to send like full resolution 8 megapixel pictures back to Ange, and she was able to then like pimp them out on social network sites in real time to Instagram and Google Plus and Twitter. So I'm there at OSCON taking pictures on my Ting phone, sending back, and Ting's rocking it the entire time. And here's why you got to go to Ting. You only pay for what you use. It's a flat $6 a month for your line, and then just your usage and whatever cut the man's going to take, and that's it. There's no contract, no early termination fee, and Ting has a rockin' dashboard you can go in there and see right where you're at all the time. And now that we got a few phones on my Ting line, a couple here for JB, one for myself, it's really nice to just go in there and see where things are at, set any thresholds I want for individual phones, or if I just want to notify myself if one of the phones is going crazy. And what I love about it is because I only pay for what I use. When I'm super smart about my voice usage, I'm like sometimes under $30. Okay? Yep. And then when I go down to OSCON, I use the phone a little bit more. I just pay a little bit more that month. And the next month, I'm back down to $20. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go see why they have no contracts or no early termination fees. Go to their blog and learn a little bit about their corporate culture, because I think you'll be pretty impressed by Ting just as a company. They just posted a great blog post on how they work, and they talk about Slack, which is something that I've been thinking about for Jupiter Broadcasting. It's sort of like a group collaboration app that lets you work across like Google Docs and Dropbox, and it's also a little bit of messaging and bug tracking and issue tracking and project management. It's a really cool program that Michael Dominic uses for his company. And I was looking at it and thinking about it, and then boom, over on the Ting blog, they talk about how they use Slack at Ting to stay organized. They've also got great videos that show you behind the scenes, ways to save money, great app picks. Ting is an awesome company, and that's why they have a no-hold customer service. Call them at 1-855-TING-FTW anytime between 8 a.m. 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and a real Canadian, boom, answers the phone. Thanks, Alan. Nice boom. And they'll answer the phone, and they'll solve your problem for you. They got great sets of phones, too, so you can go pick one out. When you go to TechSNAP.ting.com, they'll take $25 off your first device, and if you got a Ting-compatible device, well, then they'll just give you a $25 credit right there. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go check them out. And if you're in a contract and you want to start saving money right now, go try their savings calculator. See how much money you would save and maybe why it might make sense to move over a little bit early. And then to sweeten that deal, they've got an early termination relief program. When you combine how much money you'll save over the long run with Ting, go use that savings calculator and see what I'm talking about. And their early termination relief program, it might make sense to move sooner than you were originally thinking. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go see why I've been a happy customer for well over a year now. And a really big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Alan, you've been busy. I know that we just got a new version of a new episode of BST Now published, episode 47, the DES Challenge. What's this? DES Challenge?
It's the person we interviewed is a FreeBSD security officer, and his initials happen to be DES.
Oh,
so it's also his FreeBSD username.
Man, that is a lucky set of circumstances for that guy. That is a lucky. Wow, that's pretty great.
The funny one was at dinner in Cambridge 2 weeks ago. Somebody asked him, "If you had a son, would you name him? Would you architect it so his initials would be AES?"
Nice. Of course he
'Cause
would,
the
right?
success rate
He
is
should.
yes, yeah.
He should.
Yes, I know. He's like, I've never thought of that before. I was like, how has that never occurred to anyone before? It hadn't occurred to me, but that's hilarious. I love that.
And after you're done with BSD now, of course, first finish up TechSNAP. Then, because we got more show coming up, we got email and a roundup. And then go listen to that interview on BSD now. And then check out Tech Talk Today, where I dug into the whole iOS backdoor thing. Covered on Monday, and we followed it up today on episode 32.
Which one? We have 2 stories about that in the roundup.
Oh, well, then we'll talk about it more in the roundup, too. Yeah, so go listen to, after this, go listen to episode 32, and let me know what you guys think. And don't forget, too, we also have the TechSNAP subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, where you can submit some stories. We had a really great bunch of submissions this week, so I took a lot of the highly voted ones and grabbed those for the roundup. But it's always a good way to give us a sense of what you want. It doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what we're going to cover, but it helps give us an idea of the type of things you guys like covered, and sometimes we just pull directly from there, too. So you can contribute, links.techsnap.tv. It's also just a great way to bounce a question off our pretty savvy audience. If you want something quick, or you want something that might, you want to hear multiple viewpoints from like tools and things like that, links.techsnap.tv. I invite you to do a self-post there and get the community involved. If it's a good question, you'll probably get a great answer. All right, Alan. Well, with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, starting a thread in that brand new subreddit I just told you about, links.techsnap.tv. Our first email this week comes in from Carl, and Carl says, I hope this is a good question to read on air. I haven't been able to find anyone who knows the answer to this question. Maybe you guys are my only hope. Does IPsec have any increased cryptographic strength over, say, OpenVPN? For a particular given strength of cipher, key length, and quality of randomness. The reason I ask is that if I understand correctly, the secured data in IPsec is encrypted using a phase 2 key, and the phase 2 key is passed via a phase 1 key in what we might call a quasi-out-of-band fashion, i.e. phase 1 Internet Key Exchange, IKE. If I understand correctly, cracking phase 2 key would only benefit an attacker until phase 2 is rekeyed in phase 1, which happens regularly. However, cracking phase 1 keys, it seems like it could be extremely difficult because I think decrypted phase 1 keyring payloads would look like entropy. Unlike the phase 2 payload, which would look like documents, words, pictures, etc. If a deciphered phase 1 key looks like randomness, I would assume on some level that it throws a wrench in the gears of typical brute force attack. Am I way off base here? Help me if you can. Few people think about crypto to understand the question. Thanks.
Both of them are pretty secure. Like, there's no vulnerability in either. It's just the advantages to IPsec are that it's kind of a standard, and so you can have interoperability between different systems. Whereas OpenVPN is OpenVPN, you can only use it with other open. The server and the client both have to be OpenVPN.
Right. With
IPsec, the server could be a Cisco dedicated hardware thing, or a Windows server, or a Linux server, or whatever.
Yeah.
And the client can be any of those as well. With OpenVPN, it's OpenVPN to OpenVPN only. But OpenVPN kind of has similar approach, right? You have your symmetric key, your asymmetric key, your SSL key, basically, which is and then you begin the connection and use the key to verify the identity of the other end, and then you use Diffie-Hellman to come up with basically an ephemeral key that you regenerate every so often. And so you're changing the keys and using 128 or 256-bit AES with a key that changes every so often as well. I imagine that means that OpenVPN can definitely support perfect forward secrecy, and I don't know if IPsec can, but that's just because I don't know much about IPsec. It most likely can as well. So I wouldn't say that either one was more secure than the other. It just comes down to OpenVPN can be easier to set up, and IPsec is more compatible between different devices. So it really depends on what your needs are, which one I would recommend. But I wouldn't say one was much more secure than the other. In general, they're basically using the same cryptographic primitives when you get down to the actual encryption, right?
A little more about the problem you're trying to solve, I suppose.
Yeah. Or what restrictions you're working under, Do you need to be compatible between Windows and some Cisco hardware, or do you just want to, quickly set up a VPN between two Windows machines or two Linux boxes or whatever?
Yeah. or two hardware routers. All right, Count Zero writes in. He says, "Hey guys, I saw this on ProPublica today, and I thought I'd send it to you to see what you thought." He gives us a link to the article. So he says, and this is about canvas fingerprinting, and maybe I'll go into that a little bit here in a second. He says, "So here again, we have another way that online advertisers can track our web browsing. This one seems to be a lot more insidious than most others, because this one is much harder to block using traditional methods. So I'm wondering if you guys know of any way to make this kind of thing less effective. The article suggests using Tor or installing NoScript, but neither of these seems like an ideal solution. No doubt the developers of blocking tools will be looking at this, but until a solution is found, I guess we'll have to accept the fact that advertising scumbags are watching our every move." Now, this canvas fingerprinting, essentially, I think I got a link in the article or in the show notes that gives you more info. AddThis is the company that's playing with this, and these jerks brag about how they're doing it in production on sites that people already are using with their ads, and they're just trying it out on people. But essentially, even this article I linked has a demo, and what it does is the script runs and uses all the fonts on your system and the way your computer renders thing, and looks exactly at the pixel makeup of the image your computer generates, and then makes that a fingerprint for you, because it'll generate that same image on every site that uses their software. And so I can go here, and I generated one for mine, and now this is my Bonobo's unique fingerprint ID, and it converts it to a code that they use on the back end. That's the key ID that they track you with. So
yeah, they don't actually say what exactly went into making the key.
This article doesn't. They talk a little bit down here. They do say a little bit about device fingerprints rely on the fact that every computer is slightly different. Each contains different fonts, different software, different clock settings, and other distinct features. Computers automatically broadcast some of their attributes when they connect to another. Well, that's crap. That's a.
It depends. Like if you had a bunch of systems deployed from the same Windows image. So right, like all the computers at a company would be mostly the same as far as what fonts they have.
They say AddThis improved upon some previous code by adding new tests and using Canvas to draw a paragram. They draw CVMFJO. They draw a series of letters, a sentence that uses every letter of the alphabet at least once. This allows the company to capture slight variations in how each letter is displayed. They said they rolled this feature into a small portion of the 13 million websites in which the technology appears.
Right. So, browsers could probably combat this by dynamically adding and removing fonts or making it harder to detect what fonts are available or something. It depends. But, we've definitely, web designers have this opposite problem. They're trying to make their website look the same on every different device. And these guys are taking advantage of the fact that every different device does things slightly differently because they have different fonts or different versions of the fonts. And, they applied the CSS rules slightly differently and everything doesn't look exactly the same.
Yeah. It's pretty insidious because what they're getting is they're getting your browser to use Canvas and draw an image.
In general, it's never going to be quite perfectly unique. It's entirely possible to have two people that have the same ID. So they won't be able to draw quite the same conclusions to tie it to your identity. Although they probably will try. For the sake of advertising, if they accidentally show you something for someone who's got exactly the same computer setup as you, and it turns out you're not interested in it, they don't really lose anything.
No.
As opposed to trying to use this to authenticate someone.
Right. No, it wouldn't work for that. But for it's even if it's 80% accurate.
Right.
It's pretty, it's a great thing is for them is you got cookies turned off, no bigs, because they just get your computer to draw the image.
Depending what they use, if you change something about your computer, they would stop tracking you at that point.
Right. Even an OS reload might do it.
Yeah. Well, no, it's some of the sites I use a fingerprint of your browser, and so every time you upgrade your browser to a new version, you have to get sent an email and then re-authenticate.
Yeah.
Which can be annoying if you're using Chrome and it changes every day.
Yeah.
But, it seems like this type of thing, you could probably find out some of the parameters they actually use and have your browser purposely randomize those every time you start a new browsing session.
Yeah. Ben writes in with
and then it'll be an arms race back and forth between.
Right. It'll continue to always be too. Ben writes in with an unfortunately common problem. He says, "Hey guys, first off, love the show. I'm a new listener, and so far I found TechSNAP and Less to be very informative and entertaining, so thanks for that. I've been doing quite a bit of traveling recently, so I've consumed about 15 to 20 hours worth of TechSNAP so far." Nice, Ben. He says, I have many questions I'd like to ask about, but first he's going to start with this one. I have a CentOS 5 server running on VMware. It's a VM on VMware. This VM is set up using as a gateway and a router to the internet for a layer 3 routed network, and during peak hours pushes between 120,000 and 150,000 kbps. So it's not particularly huge amounts of traffic.
Yeah, but over 100 megabits is a decent amount of traffic for a router, but yes.
He's got gig interfaces attached to the VM. He says, what I've noticed is that during these peak hours, the Ksoft IRQD process puts a huge amount of load on the CPU and is causing a lot of performance issues, drop packets, requests being dropped. Do you guys have any experience with this or any certain things I can do to streamline CentOS to make it handle higher levels of traffic? Thanks in advance. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Ben.
Yeah, so basically what's happening here is every time a new packet arrives at the network card, it puts up an interrupt flag, which is actually like an electronic signal it has to send to the CPU saying, hey, I'm the network card. I need, or I'm on this IRQ channel, but saying I need attention because I need the OS to come and pick up this packet that I have for it.
Right.
But you have to imagine that happening 120,000 times a second or something. Now, more advanced server NICs will have things like interrupt moderation, where they will say, if the flag's already up and we get another packet, just include it in that, or only put up the flag once or every 100 milliseconds or every 10 milliseconds or something, so that we're not putting the flag up constantly when we're getting 10,000 packets a second or more. And then in FreeBSD, there's actually a thing in the kernel called polling, which is a mode you can enable on a network card with ifconfig, saying instead of the network card putting up the interrupt every time it has a new packet, instead every tick, which is by default on FreeBSD is 1,000 times a second or every 1 hertz, but it's adjustable. The kernel will go to the network card and say, do you have any packets for me? And it also has a bunch of tunables that allow you to say, every time you go and check, only take this many packets, so that the CPU isn't all tied down with dealing with that. Because basically interrupts that the network card raises are highest priority. So they have to be dealt with first before any user processes can run. So that means that if, especially back when polling was invented in FreeBSD and FreeBSD 4, when we only had single core CPUs, if you could generate enough traffic to make the interrupts consume 100% of the CPU, the entire machine would basically be dead. And you could denial of service attack somebody. So with polling, this would ensure that that wouldn't happen. And so there's, network cards have got smarter and do some stuff, and the operating system does some stuff. The problem is when you're doing virtualization, you don't necessarily have all those fancy features. Sometimes they emulate them and sometimes they don't. So
yes,
the first thing is in VMware, you might look at the list of different network cards you can emulate and see if there's a more advanced one that might have some of those features. Other features that newer network cards have is what's called multi-queue, where basically it simulates almost being like 4 network cards, and each different thing is bound to a different CPU. So currently, that interrupt thread is always bound to CPU 0, whereas if you can spread them out, you can get more. Especially the problem you could have is, I don't know, top in Linux probably doesn't do it, but in FreeBSD, you can press capital H when you're in top, and it breaks down by threads. And you can see if, say, all of one of your CPUs is being dominated by doing the interrupts, especially CPU 0, then that's when you'll start losing packets because there's no more CPU time to be had for that process. Whereas if you can spread it across the CPUs, you would be able to use 2 or 3 or 4 cores to handle it, and you'd be able to handle that much more load before you top out.
This is unfortunately a problem with, CentOS is what it is, but if he
it's not a problem with any particular OS. It's it's just the problem that everybody has.
The handling
and it's just compounded by virtualization.
Right. The kernel, one of the more recent kernel updates did make this particular behavior with a heavy load I guess one of the things they did is they did break it out across multi-core. Originally, I think it was single thread. I think you nailed it there.
Yeah, I think Ksoft Q/0, the 0 is which CPU it's on.
Yeah.
And whereas if it's spread out, if you have a NIC that supports it, you end up with KQsoft IRQD.
He can't really just go replace his kernel. That's not an option.
Right, and especially he's running CentOS 5,
yeah,
which is rather dated. And I don't even know. I guess it's still supported probably, but not for much longer.
Yeah. There is a boot time flag he can set. That sort of, he wants to test it before he does it in production. But I found a thread on the CentOS forums. You essentially add one line to your etsygrub.conf, And what it does is it sort of simmers down the scheduler, so that way it doesn't get it won't take as many interruptions. It'll move on to other things and then come back to the network card at a more reasonable rate.
The downside to that is it can increase latency, but we're talking like single milliseconds here, not
that
something
makes sense.
that's that
Yeah.
bad.
So that,
but depending on what you're doing, it could be.
It might be worth a try, because a lot of people in the thread said, yeah, CPU usage is still high, but the system is much more responsive, much more usable, is what people were saying in the thread. So that's one fix you might be able to do now.
Yes. The obvious fix of replacing the CentOS with FreeBSD is probably less acceptable.
Isn't this just like one more reason why, pfSense is really good for this role, because you get the benefits of that plumbing plus the good firewall.
Honestly, once you're getting up to that level of traffic, you really might want to consider hardware to do it instead of doing it in virtualization.
Yeah,
but if you are using VMware, you might look and you might be able to pick a more capable virtual network card.
Does VMware do VirtIO? Is that a thing?
But VirtIO definitely doesn't support multiple queues, so you might be better off simulating. Like by default, almost all the virtualization software chooses like the Intel E1000, which is the most basic network card and doesn't have all those features.
Yeah, the safety
Whereas
one.
if you pick something like, sometimes they call it the E1000E for enhanced, but basically one of the more advanced server NICs, it'll have multiple queues. It'll have things like TCP segmentation offloading, so that the CPU on your VM isn't having to do that. You can actually have it just pass it and let the network card do it, which is actually, since it's a virtual network card, is letting the VMware do it instead of having to. So it's not happening on the emulated CPU, but on the real CPU.
Right.
And depending on the physical hardware underneath, it could actually be being passed through and done to the actual hardware. That's another option, is if you still want to keep it in virtualization, but if you could actually do hardware pass-through of the two network cards that you have in this going through, then you can definitely get access to those multiple queues and the advanced features like large receive offload and TCP segmentation offloading and hardware checksumming and all that stuff. And that can make a difference.
It would be helpful, Ben, if you included the version of VMware. I think Ben's in the chat room right now. Because I wonder, like, if there was a VMware virtual network card driver that at least supported para-virtualization, so the operating system was aware that it's a virtual NIC and it's not thinking it's talking to a hardware device.
Yeah, although CentOS 5 might not really have much support for those anyway.
I'm not sure.
But like in VirtualBox, if you're going to pick the network card, you can choose, like, the default is Intel Pro 1000 MT desktop. Yeah. Which is like your your E1000. But there's also a Pro 1000T server and a Pro 1000 MT server that are actually higher end network cards that might actually provide more features and be more powerful. Although in VirtualBox you also have the para-virtualized networking, the VirtIO. But sometimes choosing that is actually less advantageous because it doesn't support multiple queues, so it can't spread the load over multiple CPUs, whereas the server NIC, the Intel server NIC can.
Right, okay. And if it could be
also
physical,
depends on the operating system. Some of them do not support VirtIO, but some of them do. Yeah. But yeah, basically trying a couple of those different emulated NICs and see what happens.
Yeah.
The VirtIO one might solve your problem, just because it's less of the work happening in virtualization, and so that might actually, you might not need the multiple queues to get the performance you need.
Mm-hmm. And you've also can always, if that doesn't work, you've got that boot flag you can try, Ben. Yep. All right, Simon writes in, and he says, big fan of the show, really helps me through the long drives to work. I'm looking to host multiple sites, but share them with the same external IP address. Currently, I have this working with Apache and virtual hosts and SNI for SSL, but wanting to move all of these sites to their own Docker containers. I've put together a proof of concept with Docker, but all of the sites' containers have only internal IP addresses. I suspect there is something I need to install to listen to port 80 and 443 and forward those requests to internal IP address. And is this even doable for SSL? It's critical that each Docker container Apache instance manages its own public and private SSL keys, so keys need to be stored inside the containers, as I don't want liability for the hassle of managing keys for clients who I give their own Docker containers to. Keep up the great show, Simon from Melbourne.
I had the solution until you mentioned that last part about the SSL keys.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's a tutorial I'm supposed to do and been putting off because I'm lazy for BSD now, was doing the same thing with jails. Basically, what we do is put an Nginx on the host machine that listens on the one IP address, then does the virtual hosting and proxies into the virtual machines or the Dockers or virtual machines or jails or whatever you have them, so that and they're using the internal IP address. the downside is that the Nginx needs the SSL keys.
Right.
Or the way we do it at Scale Engine, it works out that all of our stuff is under start.scaleengine.net. So we have a single wildcard certificate instead of having to have a separate certificate for each thing. But obviously, if you're hosting customers' websites, then yeah. So
Yeah, because
there's no way to do it with SSL without having the keys.
Yeah.
Because you need the keys to be able to tell what's going on.
Right, because,
Or I wonder, because if you do have SNI, you get the host name as part of the hello packet, and you might actually be able to then decide what to proxy to on the back end.
So that would require Nginx to support that?
Well, Nginx does, but I don't... Yeah, Nginx isn't going to do what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it would be an interesting thing to... It seems like it's just something no one's considered to do before, is that you'd read the first packet and then figure out which virtual host they're trying to get to, and then proxy to it and let it take over the rest of the SSL transaction.
Yeah.
And you just become a dumb TCP pipe rather than an actual HTTP reverse proxy.
Right.
So it probably doesn't really fit with Nginx. It would be something like HA proxy or something.
Okay.
That would just understand the first packet of SSL, but not anything after that.
So some sort of proxy system that is...
This could be a great feature for RelayD. RelayD needs to grow this feature.
I think what Simon is tackling with is going to be a pretty common question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is going to happen more and more.
If you take out the SSL keys not wanting to touch the SSL keys part, then Nginx can do this well, and we're going to have a tutorial on it in BSD now in a couple of weeks.
Okay. That might be worth watching just to at least get some of the fundamentals. Yeah,
it would give you everything except for, depending on your choice, you could possibly avoid the CPU overhead of SSL by the connection. The user to the server, the front end server is SSL, but then that server into the back end could be not SSL, or it can be SSL if you want to enable the encryption anyway. Okay. It depends on your setup and whether you consider it possible for the hostile people on the network, or, in my particular case, the Nginx connections into the jails are all over the loopback adapter, and so I don't worry about SSL as much.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty safe.
But,
all right.
If it's all the traffic is not yours, or, other people might be able to run TCP dump on the machine or something, you might want to still enable the SSL. But yeah, we'll have a tutorial on that.
Well, what about
as far as doing the SSL keys, that's one I would have to think about.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for the tutorial.
Yes, I'm kind of contemplating an email to Rake saying, "Hey, could RelayD do this? Could RelayD do this?"
That'd be really interesting. That'd be great. That'd be great. Mm-hmm. Mark writes in about what really makes a true backup. He says, in your last show, you talked about backups. To make some things clear, I have several questions. First, when FreeNAS makes a snapshot, could this be called a backup? So if I delete a file or a file gets corrupted, I can manually search for that file on FreeNAS and then restore it. Is this considered a backup? Second, as I understand that a backup is valid as long as all disks are okay, so I need to make a cold backup, preferably with rsync, to an external USB hard drive. What do you recommend? That rsync makes versions of files that always, that always keep 5 versions of change files or something like that? Or that maybe rsync keeps versions of change files for, say, 6 months? Which one is better? How to set that up? Is this really a true backup? Thanks for the clarifications. Best regards, Mark.
Yeah, so backup basically is kind of both of those things combined. You have to have the revisioning so that you can step back in case, the very latest backup isn't good enough. You need to be able to go back and get older copies. So that's the snapshot part comes in. But you also need to have more than one copy of that, right? So that means that, just snapshots isn't good enough. That's only a snapshot. If you have a FreeNAS with a ZFS pool and it's RAID Z1, if 2 disks die, all your data's gone and your snapshots are of no use. They're not a backup.
It's not a backup.
So instead of involving rsync, what I would do there is use the FreeNAS replication, or if you're doing a USB drive, you would just use the tool I maintain ZX for, and use from the command prompt or whatever. And basically, instead of rsyncing to the external drive, you would use ZFS replication to send it to the... So then it would actually... You would have the snapshots, the entire pool with the snapshots existing on your USB drive. So you'd be able to step through it exactly the same as you do when the snapshot's on the live system.
Beautiful.
And when you do your update, when you go and sync it again, it does only the changes. Unlike rsync, which has to recopy the entire file when there's a change, or it tries to do deltas, but when you're doing the mode where you're keeping the files in separate directories, it does the entire file because having only the middle of the file isn't much use. Whereas with ZFS, it's deduplication is not quite the right word, but because the blocks are shared, it doesn't have to keep 2 copies of them. So it actually will use less disk space than the rsync may. Plus, you have the advantage of it's your entire file system, and you could actually just plug it into a machine in the event your FreeNAS fails and your FreeNAS is back online. So yes, you need to have both parts. You basically need the snapshots and the multiple copies. Or multiple locations. The data needs to be in multiple locations.
I don't know what Mark's trying to back up and what his workload is, but always worth a recommendation. Friend of the show, tarsnap.com/bsdnow. Great backup solution that we trust. We recommend. They're a sponsor of the BSD Now program because we think they're great. And this is, if you want to know backup, this is backup. You can go check them out. And that's
because that's the other thing. When you're taking your backup, the problem with taking your backup sometimes is the file's changing while you're backing it up. That can cause a problem. So what you do is you take a snapshot right before you do a backup, and then you actually back up what's in that snapshot, which on ZFS means there's a hidden directory at the root of whatever file system you're in called .zfs, and then inside that there's a directory called snapshots, and then the name of the snapshot, and then there's actually the entire file system as it looked in that snapshot. And if you back that up, that means even if your backup takes a whole 24 hours because it's like 6 terabytes or something, it means all those files it's exactly what every single file on the hard drive looked like at the second you took that snapshot. Whereas if you do a backup of the live system over 24 hours, that means if you copied file A and then after you copied it, it changed, you don't have that change. But then when you get around to copying file C, it's changed since you started the backup, but before you backed it up. And so now the file A and C are from different times. And if they internally relate to each other or something, that breaks everything, especially databases. But it can break even your, if you have Excel worksheets that are linked to each other, it can cause problems. And that's why doing a backup from a snapshot is the best way to do it, because then you get a moment in time of every single file.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Bacula, for example, if you're doing a big network thing.
Yeah, but
it has before and after commands. So you can actually have it make a snapshot, back up that snapshot, and actually destroy the snapshot after, so it doesn't even leave any accumulate extra space, since you're already spending all the extra space on the Bacula side.
Did you hear that there's like an open source replacement of Bacula, sort of like Bacula Forked or something like that?
Well, Bacula is still open source.
No, I know.
Yes, there is a fork that. Yeah. There was some lawsuits, and
I wonder if somebody could give me the name of that, because I was gonna read about it, but I forgot.
Yes, I can get it for you.
I meant to look it up.
Emails because I'm on the Bacula mailing list.
Yeah, somebody sent it to the show a little while ago. It was like, you guys always talk about Bacula, but you never mention X, and I can't.
Right. Well, we don't mention it on purpose.
Okay. I still wanted to read it just because I didn't know what the story was, because I love Bacula.
Well,
so.
The main part of the story there is that the guy used to work for Bacula as a consultant or something, and he stole some of the enterprise code, and there was lawsuits, and
Yikes, one of those. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up the email for this week. If you'd like to send your email into the TechSNAP program, just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click that contact link, choose TechSNAP from the drop-down. We'd love to have the questions we got on this week's show was a great example of some great questions. Anything that you need help with, systems, network administration, security, hardware, ideas, concepts, training, all of that stuff. We love to kick it around. Feedback is a huge part of the TechSNAP program, and it always helps us move a conversation forward. And like this week, it was great to kind of keep a thread going on some of the topics we covered. You can also go to links.techsnap.tv and submit it there, and you'll get some community involvement as well. But with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that just didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them and give you some links to read up on your own after the show. And a lot of these links came from our brand new subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And our first one this week, Alan, is about Tails OS, the privacy-focused live CD of Linux. And some researchers have found potential bugs in Tails OS. We don't necessarily have all of the details yet, right?
But apparently critical zero-day vulnerabilities.
Yeah,
so.
That could de-anonymize a user, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Now, Tails OS, the project says, well, we've been kind of told about it, but we don't know what the details are yet. So they're not super happy about that. In fact, the group, the researchers
when it goes
about
to press before they have any details,
or goes to Twitter.
either you go responsible disclosure where you tell tales before you tell anyone else, or you go full disclosure where you give all the details to everyone. But this let's make a whole bunch of hay by making fun of Tails OS but not telling them what the problem is kind of fishy.
Yeah, well, it gets attention, right?
Yeah.
It gets attention. All right, our next story on the roundup, the ECB says money demanded after website hacked. Oh, that doesn't sound too...
So the European Central Bank was hacked, but they only found out that their website had been hacked when the attackers anonymously emailed them demanding a ransom.
Not the best alerting system, obviously.
Yeah. So stolen was a database of 20,000 email addresses of people who had registered for ECB conferences, visits, or other events that they had had. And a small number of people might have had their address, phone number, and postal code taken as well.
Bummer.
But nothing to do with the ECB is currently analyzing all European banks and making sure that their valuations of the loans that they are owed and so on are correct to try to prevent further shenanigans by banks. Apparently none of that data was stolen.
Okay.
But it seems to a trend of oftentimes data being stolen, and then all of a sudden there's a ransom demand.
Well, Alan, the hot word on the site is the same attacker who went after BBC and the Vice website has gotten after the Wall Street Journal's website and even offered some of the data it's taken for 1 Bitcoin. Dow Jones and Company took
cheap.
Yeah, not bad. Took down the server, and he says that the server, by the way, stored like news graphics and all that kind of stuff. The hacker's name is Worm, W0RM. And he said that it was credentials that would give you server access and allow you to modify articles and add new content, insert malicious content into any page, add new users, delete users, and so on for the Wall Street Journal's website. So the Wall Street Journal, I think, hired IntelliCrawl, and now the Wall Street Journal is reporting on itself. So, so they say that according to IntelliCrawl, they think it was this Worm guy, and that they did do a scan then on the Wall Street Journal's website and confirmed that they found a SQL injection vulnerability in the site that made it possible to get access to any database on the Wall Street at the WSJ.com server. And so that was potentially what he got because there was...
If you remember years ago when we used to talk about this being the nightmare scenario, is this Worm guy had just decided that instead of taking credit for it or stealing data, he had wanted to say... inject a flash 0-day vulnerability into every page on the Wall Street Journal,
right?
Then infect the computers of every person that visits the website. But in this case, he didn't. But
the Ars Technica article also mentions that same database server had 20 other databases hosted on it. So I don't know what they were, but...
much isolation there.
No.
Probably other sites related to the Wall Street Journal. And, they have subsites and separate things and different CMSs and so on.
Hey, Alan, not to be confused with the Microsoft Cyber Brigade, Google now has Project Zero. What do you think?
Yes, it's to hunt down security vulnerabilities in every piece of software that touches the internet. So basically, they're going out there to find as many 0 days as they can, basically paying a team of people to try to find the 0 days before the bad guys do and get them fixed.
I think this is a great move. And they've hired GeoHots, the former hacker who leaked the keys for the PlayStation that lets you put Linux on there. And I would not be surprised if they didn't have...
He's also the guy that was the first one to root an iPhone.
Right. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a strong focus on open source projects.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, they're the ones that are more interested in fixing the bugs. So,
So there appears to also be a bug in the Tor network that could allow someone like Alan to unmask users. Assuming you have lots of servers with lots of bandwidth, like Alan does, you essentially can pull this trick off. So this is how Alan could do it. Developers of Tor software believe they've identified a weakness that was scheduled to be revealed at the Black Hat Security Conference next month that could be used to de-anonymize Tor users. Now, this is interesting, too, because the Black Hat organizers recently announced the talk that was entitled, "You Don't Have to Be the NSA to Break Tor, De-Anonymizing Users on a Budget." This was by Alexander Volkin and Michael McCord. From Carnegie Mellon, the CERT Institute. They say the talk of theirs about this was canceled due to the request of legal counsel of the university's Software Engineering Institute because it wasn't approved for public release. They say, in our analysis, we've discovered that a persistent adversary with a handful of powerful servers and a couple gigabit links can de-anonymize hundreds of thousands of Tor clients and thousands of hidden services within a couple of months. The CERT researchers had written the abstract of their presentation. They say their total investment was just under $3,000.
Yeah. The Tor network is only moving so much traffic. That's, it's very slow, right? Because there's only so many exit nodes. So if you can provide enough of the exit nodes or enough of the traffic, you can, weed out everything that's not yours and so on. It's kind of like, you remember where there was always this concern with the Bitcoins of somebody being like 50% of the network and they would be able to reverse the chain. Well, Tor's got kind of the same thing. If one person controls a significant portion of all of the nodes, they can actually follow the packets through.
It sounds like, too, that the Tor guys haven't been provided with all of the details, but they think they found it. And they say, based on their current plans, we'll be putting out a fix that relays can apply that should close the particular bug that they found. The bug is a nice bug, they say, but it isn't the end of the world. And, of course, these things are never as simple as close that one bug and you'll be 100% safe.
Right.
That's always very wise. Okay, next story in the roundup. Internet Explorer vulnerabilities increased by 100%.
Yeah, so they have this nice graph of the number of vulnerabilities found in different software comparing the last couple of years here, or comparing 2013 to 2014 so far. And basically, Internet Explorer is the only application that has more vulnerabilities so far this year than it did last year. Most of the other ones, as you can see, are down by quite a bit.
Wow, Chrome is down a ton. So is Java. Yes. Look how much Java's down. Holy smokes.
Yep. And Firefox is down quite a bit as well.
And Flash, really, and so is Reader and Office. But boy, IE, man.
But, we're only partway through the year. I don't know what dates this covers exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's,
It shows a couple of things. It's like, Internet Explorer maybe was either getting more attention from the attackers and possibly from the Microsoft developers. It doesn't mention how many of these exploits were found by Microsoft versus by other people. Is it just Microsoft finding and fixing things in their own software, or is it other people finding it, which is more likely the case? But Internet Explorer is probably being targeted more because a lot of businesses still require people to use it. Or a lot of machines, especially if you're making a lockdown machine in a company, then if you can standardize on only having the one certain web browser, it'll be the one that was already on your system. And technically, Internet Explorer, when you're an enterprise, doesn't have that kind of version creep that you get with Chrome, where it's updating all the time. Although Firefox has long-term support versions now.
Okay,
basically, hackers are apparently increasingly targeting Internet Explorer because it's an easy target. But the interesting one is, yes, if you remember last year, we talked about Java a lot.
Yes.
And this year, a lot less.
Yes, very much less.
Although, I wonder how much of that is...
Maybe we'll get a surprise. We'll get like an October surprise with Java.
Well, yeah, they do have those critical patch updates that come in batches.
Yeah.
And there's only 4 times a year.
And then they'll disclose it. And
there'll be like 47 updates.
Yeah, exactly. All rolled into one big update.
Yeah.
This is something, this next story, you and I have said this is just going to be a more and more common thing as there's a lot of more cloud services where the only thing protecting them is just a simple username and password. People suck at username and passwords. Well, Wired took a look at how hackers hit a money mining botnet for free. Using different cloud services. This is going to be more details at the Black Hat Conference in Las Vegas next month. Well, they'll reveal how they built a botnet using only free trials and freemium accounts on online application hosting services. They say they've had, this is the Wired article, the online zombie horde was capable of launching coordinated cyber attacks, cracking passwords, or mining hundreds of dollars worth of cryptocurrency. And by assembling the botnet from cloud accounts rather than hijacked computers, they essentially built a supercomputer for free. They say we're definitely going to see more malicious activities out of these coming soon.
Yeah, although the Amazon free tier, you're limited to like 20% of one CPU.
Yeah. Well, check this out.
Generating hundreds of dollars worth of crypto coin, that's like a fraction of one Bitcoin.
He says here they found they could produce about 25 cents per account per day based on Litecoin exchange rates. Putting their entire botnet behind that effort would have generated $17.50 a week on free services.
Yeah, but how much work were they spending?
Yeah,
if I spent more than 10 minutes a week on it, it's not worth $17.
Here's what they did. They created what they call a rapid-fire sign-up and confirmation process with email services and things like that. So they would sign up for the Google App Engine. Then they would have an automated response to the Google App Engine. Then they would use freedns.afraid.org to create unlimited email addresses so that way they could have an email account for each one they create, all done with a Python script using a realistic-looking email address. And then they'd use Python Fabric, a tool that lets developers manage multiple Python scripts to control hundreds of computers over which they had taken possession.
Now, the title of the Wired article mentions Amazon. I know Amazon requires a credit card even when you're signing up for the free tier.
Right. Well, and in their actual demo, they used Google App Engine too. They didn't use Amazon, but maybe you could.
I don't know if the Google one requires a credit card to get started, whereas Amazon did at one point anyway.
Yes, right. Interesting nonetheless.
Because, requiring that means that, bad guys have to have a whole bunch of credit cards. Not that you get stolen ones or whatever, but
I think the reason why I like talking about it, though, is because these types of accounts make like desktop computers look like child's play. Like if I'm a malware author, if I want to own a box, I want to get like an Amazon EC2 instance.
Always. The free tier Amazon instances are 20% of an old Opteron.
Well, sure,
CPU.
but what if you get somebody that has like
my i7?
Right, but what if you just compromise somebody's account? Right, you just take over an account.
If you get someone else's account, then I
think that's going to become just astronomically more common.
Big machines.
Yeah.
And especially, Litecoin is more CPU and memory based, and so you can get one with lots of RAM and run lots of Litecoin. But.
Yeah. All right, you teased this next story earlier. Researchers identify hidden data acquisition services. Boy, that's putting it nice. In iOS.
Yeah, so basically there's a service that's running on iOS that basically allows you to extract all the encrypted data if, since the phone was started, someone has entered the PIN, because that's what the decryption for the data on your iPhone is. So if you've ever entered the pins that you rebooted, somebody connects over USB, they can slurp out all your data without the encryption.
And the computer they connect to over USB has to be trusted, but that's just a prompt on the phone, so you just say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So malware on your computer could make it so that when you dock your phone to back it up or whatever, an attacker could get an unencrypted copy.
Yeah, it bypasses the encryption. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're backing up your phone over the USB connection, you get the encrypted version. But if you use this service, you can get the unencrypted version, which is bad.
There's actually even a way to exploit it if you've turned on Wi-Fi iTunes syncing, and the device that you have iTunes Wi-Fi syncing with is already pre-trusted, and you own the box that has that you own that Wi-Fi box.
So if I get spyware on your computer, I can steal all the data on your iPhone, even though it's encrypted
over the Wi-Fi.
I can bypass the encryption and get the unencrypted version, which shouldn't be possible if the encryption was done properly.
Right. And that's if you have iTunes Wi-Fi syncing on, the device has been trusted, then it's possible if you have access to that machine,
basically,
to pull it all over wireless.
They have the partition, whatever, that's encrypted, but they mount it, and because they have to be able to access it unencrypted. And this acquisition service allows them to just copy it once the encryption is mounted, they can just copy all the data.
Now, did you see Apple released a knowledge base where they said, okay, this service is used for this purpose, this service is used for this purpose? They outlined it all, and it sounds legit, but at the end of the day, like, those software services are still there, and they're available for other people outside of Apple to take advantage of.
Right. Basically, it relies on nobody knowing how to access that service, which isn't a good security system.
And they were just documented after this was found, by the way, too. They were undocumented until this guy published the paper. So this is, I don't know, this is starting to make me uncomfortable, Alan, because you remember the Wi-Fi database thing that wasn't getting truncated? It was a SQLite database that they had to fix. And then there was, what was the other recent? Oh, remember how iOS was accepting any SSL cert, whether it was self-signed or not? And then they had to make a fix for that. And now we have this. It's getting a little obnoxious. But speaking of SSL, Chrome wants to get really boring. At least Chromium does. They're switching to boring SSL in the upcoming development build of Chromium. So this isn't happening in your Chrome browser right now. They're going to switch over to the Google fork of OpenSSL called boring SSL.
Yes, which we had talked about a little bit before. Honestly, the commit message for this is the kind of hilarious.
Oh, really?
It's like, switch to boring SSL. This is a reland of a revision, which was reverted in a later revision for component build issues, which is in turn a reland of a revision, which was reverted in a later revision because it broke WebRTC tests on Android. That, in turn, is a reland of a revision, which was reverted in a later revision because it broke WebView builds. Oh. This is a much larger change than its diff suggests. If it breaks something, please revert first and ask questions later.
Not surprising at all. Of course Google's going to do this, right? That's why they made the fork.
Yes. It's just interesting that the Chromium approach to doing stuff is commit now and then just revert if it breaks anything, and we'll deal with the fallout after. It's a very rapid model, I suppose. Yes.
And so if you're running the Chromium nightlies, expect some fun. Our next story, guess what? Back on the iOS thing. Another backdoor story, right? What's this? This another research paper?
This is a paper from pentest.com about identifying backdoors, attack points, and surveillance mechanisms in iOS devices.
Okay. What do we know?
You know, another great PDF.
Yeah, yeah.
58 pages.
So the author that wrote this worked as a dev team member on many of the early jailbreaks until iOS 4. He's the author of 5 O'Reilly books on securing iOS. He's designed iOS forensics techniques used in law enforcement, consulted with federal and local law enforcement for this kind of stuff, and trained law enforcement worldwide in iOS forensics and penetration arts. Boy, that's a creepy sentence.
Yeah. Overview of a number of undocumented high-value forensic services running in every iOS device, how they've evolved, what kind of data they give you, examples of forensic artifacts acquired that should never come off the device without the user's consent, but can, surveillance mechanisms to bypass personal security intended for enterprises, but make potential targets. So, there's some stuff in there so that, an enterprise has access to the phone if they own it, even if the user doesn't allow.
Right, they can provision certain things.
But an attacker can get in and pretend to be the enterprise. Suspicious design omissions in iOS that make collection of this type of data easier. Talk about fun 0 days and how we can get a little temporary fun with them for a few days until they get fixed.
It's this really what it comes down to is that slide number 6. He says Apple has worked hard to make iOS devices reasonably secure against a typical attacker, but Apple's also worked hard to ensure that Apple can access the data on end user devices on behalf of law enforcement. That's exactly what it is, right? And then of course when you make a backdoor,
Apple law enforcement process extracting data from passcode locked iOS devices. Upon receipt of a valid search warrant, Apple can extract certain categories of active data from passcode-locked iOS devices, specifically the user-generated active files on an iOS device that are contained in Apple's native app and in which the data is not encrypted using the passcode, the user-generated active files.
So put a passcode
can
on
be
your
extracted and provided to law enforcement on external media. Apple can perform this data extraction process on iOS devices running iOS 4 or more recent versions of iOS. Please note that only categories of user-generated active files that can be provided to law enforcement pursuant to a valid search warrant are SMS, photos, videos, contacts, audio recordings, and call history. Apple cannot provide email, calendar entries, or any third-party app data.
I guess if it only gets...
They actually have some diagrams of how the encryption works.
Do you think, for a second, just to take a devil's advocate break here, is it their responsibility to facilitate legal, warrant-backed searches?
I don't know. I imagine they got a lot of requests back a while ago, and they've just decided newer versions to make their own job easier.
Yeah, it appears
providing that, and and then to talk about the encryption in iOS 7, almost all native applications and OS data is encrypted with a key, but that key is not connected to your passcode in any way, but is rather encrypted using the hardware deduced key, which comes from that security processor in the device.
Right.
As of iOS 7, third-party documents are encrypted, but library and cache folders are usually not. Once the device is first unlocked after reboot, most of the data protection encrypted data can be accessed until the device is shut down. So just because your screen is locked doesn't mean anything the encrypted file system is still mounted. It's not unmounted when you lock your phone.
Right, sure.
So if you're worried about someone getting access to the data on your phone, you need to turn it off. And then everything's stored encrypted and won't be decrypted until you enter the password again. And it mentions the undocumented services running in every iOS device help make these things possible. Your device is almost always at risk of spilling all of its data since it's almost always authenticated since you've entered your passcode once since you booted the phone, almost always, right? And it goes on and on and on for 58 pages of all the cool stuff.
So essentially, if you have an iOS device, you might have a better protection potentially against... Here's the thing, and I just want to put this out there as devil's advocate is, I think in terms of end users, they're more likely to get their device screwed up by, at least this happened to me, some crap app in the Play Store. Like, in terms of actual things people are going to be exposed to, that's more likely, because this is more for law enforcement. But like I've said, the problem is now that the information's out there, you better bet people are working on tools to just take advantage of this stuff. And now are we going to see Apple quietly tuck this stuff away and hide it more? Are they going to pull it out? Are they going to double down? That's what's going to be the interesting response, I think. And mobile devices are just a security nightmare and a privacy nightmare in general. Go get a Firefox OS phone, everybody. And there you go. Is there anything else in that PDF you want to pull out?
No, there's great stuff though.
Yeah,
I recommend people go and look at it.
Linked in the show notes. Oh, that's interesting. They talk about how some of the stuff in here is open source too. Some of it's been around since 2009. Okay, anyways, that's all in the PDF. You guys can find that in the show notes. All right, I wanted to give you Windows users. Oh wait, no, this is something first. I got a tool for you Windows users coming up. Look at this, Alan. This is the Responsible Open Source Disclosure Framework. It's a framework maintained by BugCrowd and CipherLaw. It's designed to quickly and smoothly prepare your organization to work with independent security research community while reducing the legal risks and those to the research companies too. It's pretty nice. The policy itself has been written with both simplicity and legal completeness in mind. I haven't gone through it, but it sounds like something that's desperately needed.
Yes, it definitely sounds like the kind of stuff you need to make it easier, especially for companies that are worried about stuff, to actually cooperate with security researchers and make things happen in the right way.
Alan, how can this be? A profile picture is risky?
Yes, having a profile picture can be risky. So in particular, this one is talking about WhatsApp. But it's in this post, they'll show how an apparently insignificant information on WhatsApp could be used by an attacker or a hacker in a more dangerous targeted attack. So in particular, in WhatsApp, when you add a random phone number to your contact list, it goes and gets their profile picture. Right? So in this example, some guy who the researcher didn't know, named Bob, was selling a 52-inch smart TV on Craigslist or something for $1,000. So the ad included the guy's phone number, so you could call him and talk about buying his TV. So the researcher added Bob to his WhatsApp contacts list and got Bob's picture, his profile picture, which is, only this big, but whatever. But now he knows the guy's name is Bob. He lives in this general area, and this is what his face looks like. So then he goes over to Facebook and searches for Bob in this area and looking, comparing the pictures until he finds the right Bob. Probably easier if the guy's name isn't Bob, right? But anyway, so he found the guy. Yeah. The public profile doesn't say much about the guy, but it gives you additional detail, like what school he went to, which is enough for you to get access to his private profile, right? So you set up a new fake profile pretending to be some guy that Bob went to school with, right? And now Bob will accept your friend's request on Facebook.
It's an old friend. He just kind of forgot him.
Now that you have access to Bob's profile, you find out where he works and a bunch of other stuff. And also who his friends are. And you become part of the circle of trust, which often in Facebook means access to the friends of friends class of data, which means you might be able to get the phone number of some of Bob's friends or certain other information.
Or a maiden name of a mother or something like that.
Yeah, and things like that. Now you know his best friends, his relatives, people he works with.
Even knowing the high school in town is very valuable.
Yes, and in particular in this case, you can find somebody he's friended on Facebook but who hasn't talked to in a very long time, right? Are interested in that latter group. So we browse Bob's news feed, find some person who hasn't said anything in a while, and we set up another fake account as that person. Right? Now, this time, as you might have guessed, it's time to impersonate a friend of Bob. And we also know from looking at Bob's profile what Bob likes. He likes roller coasters, and you can find out what brands he likes and whatever he likes to talk about. So in this case, we find out that Bob likes roller coasters. So now you can set up a fake profile as John on WhatsApp or whatever, and send Bob a link via Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever about a news story about a roller coaster having an accident or something.
Oh,
right?
nice.
Or some new great roller coaster or something that Bob would definitely want to click on because he likes roller coasters.
Right.
Well, you send him a link that actually takes him to some drive-by malware and will infect his computer or his phone, right? Because it's WhatsApp. Right? So we send Bob this WhatsApp message with a link referencing valid news from some trusted source, but what they actually do is it's a drive-by download and infects his mobile phone with malware. Now that we've got that, we have access to all of his emails, his files, his contacts, and everything else that's on his phone, right? And what do we use that for? Well, we know from Bob's Facebook that he's the assistant manager in the accounting department at some corporation. So now having access to his work emails and stuff could be valuable. But do you know what we do next? We email all of the people Bob works with with some we've read his email. We know what they're talking about. So we can reply to an email pretending to be Bob and include a link or an attachment to infect everybody Bob works with. And now we completely owned Bob's company, wherever he works, right? And, on like that. And all of this just from Bob's profile picture on WhatsApp.
Yeah, and I was also thinking the other thing you could do is you could take Bob's profile picture and drop it in the Google image reverse lookup and see what other sites maybe that picture's on and get a little bit better idea of where his presence is online, yeah. Okay, I promised it a couple of links ago. Here we go. For you Windows PowerShell users out there, how about this one? Posh-SSH, an open source SSH PowerShell module. You can now establish SSH and SFTP sessions using credentials or open SSH keys, connect through socks or HTTP proxies for both SSH and FTP sessions, execute commands in a remote SSH using remote SSH exec command, or upload and download files using SCP, all inside PowerShell now. And it's funny because we were at OSCON and this very topic came up.
Is this, you're on the Windows machine and you're using this to get the SSH tools?
Yes. No. It's so if you...
Or is this, I'm on my machine and I'm going to SSH into a Windows server and be dropped into a PowerShell shell?
No, it's like if you're on a Windows box and you need to script some actions that need to take place on a remote SSH server, so the Windows box now will be able to execute, like in the PowerShell scripting, you could do a remote SSH exec or you could do an SFTP transfer in a PowerShell script.
I've been doing that for 10 years. There's command line tools, like command line versions of PuTTY. There's plink and PSFTP and PSCP.
But PowerShell's the new hotness, Alan.
Right. Well, you can use PowerShell to write the script and just call the regular.
You could, I suppose so.
I was excited because I thought this meant SSH into your Windows server and sit at a PowerShell.
No, sorry, buddy. Sorry.
There's something like that does exist because one of my servers at OVH actually has it apparently.
Yeah, there is a tool out there.
Right. Okay. But I guess these are modules that might mean you use them more. They're like a library rather than executable, and that maybe has advantages in speed stuff.
It's up on GitHub too, so you can just go grab it.
Sure.
Which is pretty nice. And he's got some example code here, which it looks really straightforward. So I just figured the reason why I actually threw this in here is we were at OSCON and people were like, there's a really big Microsoft booth, and I heard people talking about, the problem is I got to work with my Linux box, and they're talking about SSH, and then boom, I saw that.
They should look at PuTTY, like plink. Because that's actually how my Tortoise SVN actually talks over SSH to my SVN server.
That's way more convenient than Cygwin. I saw the headline, but I didn't get a chance to read this next one. An Ars editor learns the feds have his old IP address and his full-on credit card numbers.
So he did a Freedom of Information request, basically about what the Customs and Border Patrol Protection Company has records on him.
Yeah.
So there's these things called passenger name records, or PNR, which are data created by airlines, hotels, and cruise ships whenever you book travel, and they're shared with the United States Customs and Border Protection. And, so he sent a Freedom of Information request and got a very basic thing and wasn't satisfied with it and sent another one and actually got the full thing, which was 76 pages covering 2005 to 2013. And it shows that CBP retains massive amounts of data on us when we travel internationally. His own PNRs include not just every email address, every physical mailing address, email, and phone number he's ever used related to travel, but the IP addresses he used every time he bought an airline ticket, his credit card number in full, even though most of the times it's X'd out the middle of the credit card number because it doesn't actually matter.
Wow.
The government, with your name and the first and last digits of the credit card number, they don't need the whole number.
Wow.
But it seems sometimes the airlines actually goofed up and stored your entire credit card number in the data they give the government.
Okay.
Which just, is ripe for being stolen. But what language he used to buy the tickets, any notes from every phone call he ever made to the airline to, requesting a seat change or a flight change or whatever.
Really?
Yeah. So he says, the breadth of long-term data retention illustrates yet another way that the federal government enforced its post-September 11th collect it all mentality. So, he's got a bunch of pictures of it because it's all, flat text, pipe delimited, hard to read data. He actually had to get some help from people that know the what all the code names mean to actually. But if you break it down, you can see some of the stuff. There's a log here. The passenger called to see what he could to say that he received the email that his flight returning is delayed by 3 hours and will leave, but he wants to not change his itinerary and book or a different way, but he might check back. And then you see later there's another call saying that, he wants to change his flight. Instead of going from Heathrow to Philadelphia or something, he wants to go from Heathrow to BWI as originally booked, so he wants to take, instead of taking the next available flight, he wants to take one later, so he actually ends up at the airport he wanted to be at. And, it actually documents everything he said on the phone.
And what he points out is the real problem here is this is just a ton of data to build a profile about him, but also data that could be leaked, compromised, etc.
Yeah. Well, part of the thing is basically, as far as he knows, the people that work at the call centers for the airline don't know that everything they type into this box is actually being kept by the government forever about
I
that
bet
person,
they don't.
Right? It's not just, they probably think, oh, these are just notes about this one case, and, a couple of months from now when the flight's over, it'll be thrown out. And so the people in the call centers aren't being trained on data minimization, right? If they knew this was being stored forever, they could take steps to only record the stuff that's actually important.
It's almost like they weren't informed on purpose, Alan. Yeah. Not
and
awesome.
it also, in the data here, you can see that apparently his card issuer address didn't match the details he had entered. So his address verification system failed on his credit card one of the times. And it's like, here he is. Involuntarily rerouted customer via Philadelphia.
Yay for the age of recording it all.
Yeah. And it talks about, it's not just metadata. It's even, whether or not the person accepted the terms of condition on travel and, every email that was sent to them. There's just huge amounts of data. And then he actually plotted a bunch of the stuff on a map to show that it actually shows more than, you would think it does.
Alan, have you ever heard of Catch of the Day before?
No, it's Australian.
Well, they've revealed a 3-year-old data breach.
It's something kind of like Groupon or something.
Or
not
Woot,
quite
maybe?
Like Groupon, but
kind of like a Woot, maybe?
I don't know what Woot is, but yes. Basically, they had sales and stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So it was an Australian deals website, and apparently in April of 2011, they were hacked. And they waited until just now to tell their customers and the Privacy Commissioner of Australia about it, even though they're supposed to tell them right away. Now, they told the police, banks, and credit card companies immediately when they were hacked.
Oh, of course.
But they didn't tell the customers. And they're only telling the customers now because, quote, technological advances, quote, mean that the hashes that they had used to store the passwords could actually be compromised now.
Oh.
So they're asking everybody who has a password that hasn't changed since 2011 to please reset their password.
Well, that's going to be an ongoing problem for all kinds of these breaches over time.
Yes, well, except for all those breaches, we were informed almost immediately, and people were asked to change their password.
That's the difference.
These guys like, oh, well, we don't think anybody can crack these hashes right now, so we're not going to bother telling them until 3 years later when it becomes possible to crack those hashes.
Oh.
But why is it up to that company to decide whether their hashes are that crackable or not? I'm assuming they're like MD5 or something.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
Or they're definitely not SHA-256 or SHA-512 crypt or bcrypt, because those aren't going to be hacked.
No.
So it means it's something less secure. It means it was hackable 3 years ago too.
Mm-hmm.
We were hacking stuff with video cards 3 years ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, Mark Rusinovich has a suggestion. Maybe you should just switch over to something secure like NT4. After all, it works for the New York subway.
He just commented on it. Someone else found it. But yeah, someone was riding the subway and noticed when they went up to the machine to buy their Metro card or to put money on it or whatever, that it was in the middle of rebooting. And it shows the boot menu where you can select between Windows NT4 and Windows NT4 in debug mode.
Yeah.
Which probably puts out everything to like a serial port.
Yeah, they have debug port 6.
Yes. So I'm guessing that means that either a serial port or a FireWire port you could connect to, and you would get all the debugging data, which might include, the keys for the encryption that it's using to discuss for taking the credit cards and stuff.
I think we could just do full stop. It's running NT4. I mean, that's
it's running
right there.
NT4, which means it's probably that old and hasn't had any updates at all.
Oh,
which means that the encryption it's using, NT4. I don't even think AES is standardized.
Well, and unless they've changed, I mean, it's very possible they obviously customized the boot INI file here. But when you install a service pack in NT4, it would append the service pack number to the end of the boot INI. There is no such
4.03.
You think that's service pack
versions? There might be service pack 3, but the latest service pack
that's what I was
in
wondering.
2001 was service pack 6.
Yeah. I mean, 3 was a good service pack, but it's not the last
one. More than 15 years old, and at least missing security packs from more than 13 years ago.
Well, you see, Service Pack 4 was a real jerk. And Service Pack 5 was hit and miss. Really, 6 was awesome.
Okay. Yeah, and people who weren't around don't know. Back then, the Service Pack for Windows NT came on CDs that were mailed to you by Microsoft.
If you
because
requested,
it was not possible.
Yeah.
It wasn't practical. It wasn't practical to download a 600 megabyte patch.
No, what they would do is they would, on a CD, they would ship you the network version that you would then put on your network file server to patch all your NT servers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, this last story in the roundup kind of brings us back to the story that started with TechSNAP. When we first launched TechSNAP, this story broke the Sony, you guys remember.
It was the second or third week of TechSNAP.
The Sony PlayStation Network breach. We'll bring it all to a close now. Sony has agreed to pay up to $17.75 million in the 2001 PlayStation networking hacking settlement.
Yeah, so this was a class action lawsuit. And so if you accepted the welcome back pack, you're not eligible for the settlement.
You gave up your option there.
Yeah. In the welcome back pack, I think was your choice of 2 out of 15 games.
Yeah, it was pretty lame.
Well, it turns out that the settlement of the class action lawsuit is your choice of 1 of those games. So you actually get less than if you had just taken the deal.
Unless you got your ID stolen, right?
Yeah, if you got your ID stolen, you're eligible for up to $2,500 based on what happened to you.
Good news, everybody. They had
so if you had $500 stolen, you get $500, and if you got more stolen, you would only get up to $2,500.
They had $2.75 million in attorney's fees for this.
Yeah. And but I imagine most of that $17 million is made up of the value they assigned of $9 to each of the games they're going to give away. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the list of games, these are it's mostly the same games they were giving away back in 2011.
Oh, it's lame.
It's not like anything new that you might want.
Screw them. Like, way to screw over your users and then just give them pittance.
Well, it's kind of horrible that this was accepted as the resolution to the class action lawsuit.
Yeah, what about
giving away the stuff they were willing to give away anyway?
I mean, Sony, this happened a couple of years ago. This was really one of the first big ones that got into the popular consciousness. And, how about demonstrating there's some repercussions for failing your customers so badly? Yeah. Because it just came down to Apache negligence that caused it.
Yeah, and
led to it, I suppose, or allowed it.
You could, even if you just settled to, $10 to each person that was affected, that signed up for that joined the class action or whatever.
I think
instead of here have a free game that actually cost us nothing, but we will say cost us $9.
I feel like, Alan, it comes from the approach that the legal system takes, because in this scenario, the company is an absolute victim. They've been attacked. They've been hacked. They were attacked. But instead, perhaps we should consider, did that company exercise negligence? They had customer information, they had credit card information, they had users' identifiable information like address, phone number, name. Were they negligent in protecting that? That should be a question they're asking.
It's very hard to actually decide whether it was your fault you got hacked.
Yeah, I know.
If they took certain steps, or, they were audited, if they were PCI compliance audited, which they would have had to have been, they could just say that, we were audited, and so we thought everything was fine.
Sure, we weren't patching anything, but we were audited.
Yeah, and so then is it the auditor's fault that they didn't find this? And it's like, we weren't given the inside scoop on how Sony's network was actually laid out to be able to find that one server that was over.
We follow the standards that were set by this institution.
Yeah, and so it just ends up all this blamelessness.
And so, there we go. So they're going to pittance, but
that's a very small number considering how many people are affected.
Yeah, and it was a huge deal at the time too, and it really set Sony back a little while. But they seem to have rebounded from it completely now. But for a little while, remember remember they had it down for a while. They took the PlayStation Network down for a while while they worked on this.
Well, when it got hacked, it was shut down for like a month or something.
Yeah, that was a big deal back then. So there you go, $17.75 million. I don't know how you'd ever prove your ID was stolen because of that, but there you go. If you do,
Well,
there's
if
some money.
if it was stolen within a certain time frame, you could, and you were a member of the Sony
so.
thing, you could just claim it or whatever.
Yeah, I guess so.
But yeah.
All right, Alan. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of TechSNAP. You can go send us an email. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link. But even better, why don't you join us live over at jblive.tv on a 1 p.m. on a Thursday, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
boom. jblive.tv for the video, jblive.info for our various audio versions, high bandwidth and low bandwidth. And don't forget about that subreddit, links.techsnap.tv. We'd love to hear your suggestions for what we should include. Your questions are also welcome there as well. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.